Hello, and welcome to another installment of Practical Farms, where we take a look at different farms and make them more practical depending on where we are in each phase of the game. Today we're going to be doing something a little bit different though. We're going to be giving an upgrade to a previous farm. You see behind me our simple to build moss farm, and if you built it, you know that it does a great job of producing all the moss drops you could possibly want. But wouldn't it be great if you could use it to automatically make bone meal? And wouldn't it be even better if we could then feed that bone meal back into the dispenser so that we never run out of bone meal for our farm? And how great would it be if we could flick a lever and switch modes to where we could still produce the moss drops if we want to? Well, if this sounds like a good idea to you, you're in luck. That's what we're going to be doing today, giving our moss farm a much needed upgrade. But if you haven't built the moss farm yet, I recommend that you go ahead and do that. I'll put a card up here in the corner where you can go and take a look and build the moss farm, and then come back and see how to give it the upgrade. But with that, let's go ahead and get started with the tutorial. Now, as we take a look at our moss farm, what we were going to want to do is to add composters to the output of our collection system so it can automatically convert it to bone meal, and then use a dropper elevator to bring the bone meal up to this level so it can then be fed using hoppers into our dispenser. An important thing to take into consideration, though, is that we want to make sure that the hoppers come in at a level that does not inhibit the growth and spread of our moss. In my testing, I've seen that any blocks, even hoppers, glass, or other solid blocks, placed on the level even with one block above or any number of blocks below the moss will prohibit the spread of the moss to the blocks down below. I'm not entirely sure why that's the case, but I have an idea that it might have something to do with it. The mechanics of the moss probably is checking at this level first, even with itself, to see if there are any solid blocks within the grid area that it can propagate to. And if there is, it then checks to see if it is a block that it can spread to, and does it have an air block above it. And if it does not, it just fails that square and moves to another one, even if there are some eligible blocks down below that could spread the moss. And for that reason, we want to make sure that when we bring our hoppers across from our elevator to our dispenser, that we do so at a higher level up here. So the first thing you're going to do is move these blocks so that we can have the hoppers come in at the correct level and feed into the dispenser. So let's do that first. So what we're going to need to do is first remove our repeater, and remember that it's at a 3-tick delay. Remove it in that solid block, come here, crouch place a hopper into the top of that, and then another one on top of it. Then place a solid block on top of our piston, and then come in and place a redstone repeater on top of this hopper and into that solid block, and making sure that we don't forget to put it onto a 3-tick delay like it was before. We're going to need to bring these blocks up once. Let's go ahead and remove the redstone dust on here and here. Place a solid block there and remove the one below it. Remove this redstone dust, place a block here, and then come in and place the glass block above it and replace the redstone dust we removed. We can then come in here, remove that block, and we're going to need to stair step the redstone signal up to here. So let's go ahead and remove these 3 pieces of dust, add a layer of blocks here and here, come back in with redstone dust, and we're all set. This is now at a level high enough to where we will not interfere with the propagation of the moss when we come in with our hoppers and create a chain all the way over here to where our elevator is going to be. Now let's go ahead and put in the composters and our item elevator. To do that, let's go ahead and clear out some space for us to work with. Go ahead and remove our double chest, the rails, and our hoppers, and then come down here and place our composters right there and there. Then crouch place the hoppers into there, What will happen is whenever our rail car comes across these, they will automatically feed into our composter and automatically produce our bone meal for us using all the moss drops. Now that these are in place, let's go ahead and put our rails back on top of each of these two hoppers. Then we're going to need to come in and place a couple of hoppers feeding out of this and into a double chest. So let's go ahead and put our double chest here in front. Clear out some more blocks so we have room to work around behind the back of it. Come back one more. And then we crouch place our hoppers so they feed from the composter into our double chest. If all we wanted to do was produce bone meal, we could just stop here, but since we do want to feed up to our hopper chain up there, let's go ahead and put in an item elevator. To do this, let's clear out some blocks here to work with. And then we can put in our dropper elevator, starting right there. And we'll just chain it all the way up. Now the easiest way to do this I have found is to go ahead and place some solid blocks and just create a column going up. And every third block, come back and crouch place 3 additional droppers. And keep doing that until you reach the height that you want. And there's our hoppers. So let's go ahead and put the dropper here and here. And then we can place one more hopper above our dropper chain. The next step is to come in behind here and place another column of blocks coming all the way up. Let's clear out our space to work with again. And just have it come all the way up to match the height of these blocks. Again, clear out a little more space. Then come in and just kind of go back and forth in a zigzag pattern all the way up our column of droppers until we get to the top. Then come in with redstone torches and place them starting at the bottom off the back of each one. Again, in a zigzag pattern. Now that those are in place, we need to tie our chest of bone meal into the bottom dropper of our elevator. So let's go ahead and come around here and crouch place a hopper pointing into the bottom dropper. Now we don't want all of the bone meal to be sent up into our dispenser. We only want to have it replace the bone meal that is used. That way it's running at maximum efficiency. So what we're going to do is tie this elevator into the redstone signal of our hopper clock that tells the dispenser when to bone meal the moss block. In that way, we'll only have the elevator activated when a piece of bone meal is used. Now the only problem is that this hopper doesn't care about how much is being sent. It will send every single piece of bone meal it can from this chest up through the hopper elevator. So to prevent this from happening, what we're going to do is again remove a few more blocks so we can get down here. Place a solid block here with a redstone torch on this side underneath this hopper. Place a couple more solid blocks here and here, and then another one here and here. And then place redstone dust coming on top of each of these. Then we'll come in and create a stair step so that we can tie into the hopper clock's signal. And so what happens is that whenever the clock sends a pulse to our dispenser to use a piece of bone meal, that signal will come down this chain, deactivate that torch, which will unlock this hopper for one pulse, allowing bone meal to be sent into the dropper elevator. The elevator then will be activated, and this daisy chain of redstone torches going upwards will flicker on and off and activate the droppers in order all the way until a piece of bone meal reaches the top. It'll then be fed across the hopper line and then down into our dispenser, so we will never run out of bone meal. Now with this dropper elevator, the pieces of bone meal will only be sent up a couple of the droppers at a time per pulse. So that means it will take several cycles of the clock before the bone meal will reach the top of the elevator and be fed into our dispenser. Of course, this means that there will always be a few pieces of bone meal in our elevator. And while there may be some dropper elevators that are more lossless in this regard, this one is much simpler to build, and for our needs, since we'll only be sending one piece of bone meal at a time anyway, it's perfect for our situation. So there's no need to overcomplicate our elevator, since this one is so easy to build and cost effective. And that's all it takes to convert your moss farm into a bone meal farm. And if that's all you want is to produce bone meal, then you can stop here and it'll work perfectly fine. But if you want to take your upgrade to the next level, we can add one more feature which will also collect some of the moss drops so you can use them as well. And with a flick of a lever, turn that feature off and on. So if you're interested in that, let's go ahead and I'll show you how to upgrade your farm so that your farm will be able to produce both moss and bone meal. To add the moss collecting module to this upgraded farm, first we need to do is remove our rails here and here, take out these blocks, place our double chest right here, and then we're going to need to come in and put in some hoppers pointing into there. We need to clear out a few blocks just to give us some room. Go ahead and replace the rails that we're feeding into it. Have to crouch place to do that. And this will collect half of the moss for moss blocks and half for bone meal. But if you want to have an on-off switch, it takes a couple extra steps. So what we're going to do is remove this block here and replace it with a redstone lamp. Place a lever on top of it, and then let's go ahead and clear out some blocks so we can run a redstone signal. And I like to replace these kind of blocks with a different block so we know what we're working with. Go ahead and clear out some room here. Alright, and then I'm going to need to come in behind here so let's clear out a few blocks. And then what we need to do is place a redstone torch on the back of each of these two blocks. When these redstone torches are on, they will lock both of these hoppers so that they don't collect any blocks. Now we need to put a switch in there so that we can turn that feature off and on. Let's go ahead and fill this back in real quick. In order to do that, we need to go ahead and place a couple of redstone repeaters here and here, and then come back with redstone dust feeding into the back of them. That way when this lever is switched on, it will activate our redstone lamp, which will power this redstone dust, which powers these repeaters, and turns off those torches. In this way, whenever this light is on, it means that this chest will be collecting moss drops. Then you can just go ahead and cover that up so it looks pretty. And that's your on-off switch for collecting moss drops. We can do something similar over here to where if we don't want to collect very much bone meal, we want to collect primarily moss, but we still want to make enough bone meal to power our dispenser. I find that if you disable one of the hoppers, it will produce exactly the amount of bone meal you need in order to maintain the status of the dispenser, and it'll never run out. So we need to do something very similar. Come and remove this block and place a redstone lamp here. put a redstone torch coming off the side of here. This torch locks this hopper, and then place a lever right there so that when it is turned on, it deactivates this redstone torch and turns on our light. This tells us that it will be collecting additional moss drops for us to use to produce additional bone meal. And that's all there is to upgrading a moss farm to become a multi-purpose bone meal and moss farm. Of course, don't take my word for it. Let me demonstrate for you how great it works. Whenever you start the farm, you will need to prime it with a little bit of bone meal. I found that it really only needs about 16 pieces or less, usually 8 to 10 pieces, in order to fill up our dropper elevator and have a few extra spare down here for us to work with. And you usually will end up with like somewhere between 6 and 8 pieces of bone meal perpetually kept indefinitely in our dispenser. I'll let it run for a few minutes, and once we see it stabilize, I'll come back and show you how it did. Alright, so I've let it run for just a few minutes, less than 10 minutes as a matter of fact, and it's reached a state of equilibrium. So let's go ahead and take a look. As it's about to come in here, you'll see that it has 7 pieces of bone meal. It uses 1, and within a few seconds, these hoppers deliver a replacement piece of bone meal. And it's been doing this for several minutes now. As a matter of fact, we also have an additional 15 pieces of bone meal, more than we have used. So this is more than sufficient and self-sustaining. And if we come over here, we can see we also have several stacks of moss and azalea trees and flowering azaleas, as well as the moss carpets as well. And as long as this light is on, it'll take half of the moss drops and put them into this chest and use the other half for bone meal. If you want it to be 100% bone meal, just turn that lever off. If you want it to be primarily moss drops, just turn this one. Only one of the composters will convert the moss into bone meal, which in my testing I found over the course of several hours produced exactly the amount of bone meal you need to maintain the system. And that's it. That's how you upgrade your moss farm to be a bone meal farm, and still have the option of collecting moss drops if you want. But with that, I hope you enjoyed this tutorial and it helps you out in your world. If you do use this farm, I'd greatly appreciate it if you left a comment down below telling me how it worked out for you. But that's it for now. So I hope to see you again in the next one. But until then, this is Texas BK. Be good to each other. Bye!